Welcome back. Thank you. So the media plays an undeniable role in shaping the opinions and actions of Canadians, something our next guests know a lot about. Connie Walker is a Pulitzer Prize and Peabody Award-winning journalist and the host of the acclaimed podcast Stolen. And Sabreena Delhon is the CEO of the Samara Centre for Democracy.
And they're both here to talk to us about the role that storytelling plays in reconciliation. Connie and Sabreena, welcome to The Social.
Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having us.
Sabreena and Connie, we want to talk about the Samara Centre for Defense. Sorry, Sabreena, Connie is this Samara Centre's Defense of Democracy speaker this year. So when we're talking about defending Canadian democracy, what do you currently see as the biggest threat?
The biggest threat to our democracy right now is the sense that we are divided, disconnected, and disengaged. Globally right now, democracy is declining, and that's because there's a rapid spread of misinformation and a rise in something called affective polarization. This is when you have a negative feeling towards someone that has a different political perspective than you do, even though when it comes to the big issues, you're not actually that far apart. The stories we tell about our democracy shape how we feel about it, what we contribute to it, how we see ourselves in it. If the dominant story is that we're polarized, it pushes us away instead of drawing us in.
You know, Connie, you've spoken about in your career about the role of storytelling, right? And not only for upholding democracy, but also in advancing reconciliation. So as a journalist, talk to us about how those two fit together.
I think they're so interconnected, actually. Like the challenges facing democracy and the challenges facing truth and reconciliation are so interconnected. And my job as a journalist has really been focused on the truth-telling part of that, specifically from an Indigenous perspective, helping people understand the lives and realities of Indigenous people in Canada. I think that's so important. As an Indigenous person, as a First Nations person who grew up in my home, in my community, so much of my work has been to try to bring people into our communities, get to know Indigenous people, primarily through podcasting in the last few years, but really just to try to, again, use empathy and connection and the power of storytelling to help us realize how alike we are in so many ways, how every story is a human story, but there are truth and facts about Indigenous people that we should all know and understand.
I mean, Connie, you've actually really taken a more personal approach to journalism. You even investigated your own family's history at residential schools. So talk about the role that personal storytelling can have in terms of bridging those gaps.
Yeah, it's been relatively new for me. You know, I think for a while in my career, I thought that, you know, being an Indigenous person made it actually kind of tricky to tell stories about our communities. There was a fear of being accused of being biased or having some kind of, you know, bias that would work against me in telling these stories. And I think what I've realized is that it's actually a tool. It's a powerful tool to acknowledge the transparency, to acknowledge how my lived experiences as the daughter of a survivor of residential schools, but all of my grandparents went to residential school, how that actually, you know, my lived experience gives me powerful tools to help tell these stories in a way that can connect with people and help people understand them. And that's something that, you know, again, has been a relatively new thing, but I think that audiences appreciate that transparency. They appreciate that authenticity. And I think, you know, so much of my career, selfishly, has been, you know, my own quest to understand myself and how I'm connected to this history.
And the way, Connie, you're like my favorite storyteller in this country. Honestly, you are a national treasure, and the way that you tell the stories connects us to them too. If you've heard our podcast, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Sabreena, I want to ask you, I mean, you're focused, your career is on democracy, right? And there's still, I don't know if there's a willingness sometimes to hear these stories. They're difficult to hear. So how urgent is this to you?
You know, learning's about information that changes and challenges the way you see yourself, your country, and your history. It's not always easy. But it is so important to listen and learn from these stories because it gives us a meaningful way to contribute to reconciliation that also strengthens our democracy. So much of what we understand about our politics and our society right now is based on polling data that asks if we're more far apart, who are you going to vote for? Are you for this or against that? Dials up the pressure and makes it feel like we have to pick a side and we have to stick with it. It makes us feel terrible. It makes us feel disconnected, like we don't have a voice, that we can't make a difference. What's missing is the human element. Stories that are nuanced and complex and help us understand the lived experience of communities are so vital to getting past that sense of intimidation or discomfort people feel about these kinds of challenging topics. And when we have time to take the generational perspective, as Connie's able to do in her amazing work, it slows us down. It makes us really reflect and think about what kind of future do we really want together, and that is invigorating and important.
So true. Yeah. So, Connie, in an effort to further reconciliation, you have plans to embark on a new research project to document the stories of residential school survivors. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, I think we've all heard of the work of the TRC, right? It's a commission that traveled across the country hearing testimony from survivors, over 6,000 survivors, but actually the most comprehensive accounting of what happened in residential schools to the children there was recorded through the residential school settlement, part of a process called the independent assessment process, which was designed to offer compensation to survivors for abuse. And 26,000 survivors participated in that process, making it the most comprehensive accounting of what happened at individual schools. But all of those records have never been made public. And because they want to protect the privacy of survivors, they're actually all going to be destroyed in less than 3 years. And through our podcast, Surviving St. Michael's, I was investigating my father's experience at one residential school in Saskatchewan. And as part of that, we were able to, record the testimony and protect the testimony of 500 survivors. And I want to do a similar project on a broader scale.
Wow, that's incredible, and I can't wait to see your work on that. Connie, you and I have been journalists for a long, long time, and often when we talk about the future of journalism, Sabreena, it's met with a lot of pessimism, right? What gives you hope? Because journalism, Sabreena, depends on an informed citizenry.
Well, what's giving us hope is the sheer number of students that are coming out on Thursday night to learn from Connie. We have high school students that are studying law, history, policy, you name it. They're not just coming, they're coming in huge groups. They're so excited to learn. And so the opportunity to build relationships with this next generation of active citizens is so inspiring. It's hard not to feel excited about that.
I'm so excited about
Yes. To circle back from where we began, Connie, when we talk about democracy, we are in a way talking about power, but I think a lot of people, especially in these times, feel very powerless. So talk about how learning more about our country's history can actually empower Canadians.
Well, I think knowledge is power, actually. We all have the capacity to learn and to grow. And I think that, what we've all been seeing over the last 10 years is a really radical transformation of all Canadians becoming engaged in this idea of reconciliation and wanting to know the truth and hearing more stories from Indigenous people. And, this past September on Orange Shirt Day, I remember I was driving in the car with my 12-year-old, and we decided to count the number of orange shirts that we saw on our not very long drive home. And I think we estimated we'd see around 20, and we saw over 60. And honestly, I have chills right now just thinking about that. It was so amazing for me as somebody who's been doing this work and been trying to do this work for so long to see that engagement. I so appreciate it. And it was also so important for me as a mother to have my child see that and to know that this is part of their story, this is part of their history, and Canadians care. Because for a long time, I think that wasn't the case in Canada and in media. And I know that that's changing, and it makes me so hopeful.
Yeah. Connie and Sabreena, thank you so much for being here today. Viewers in the Toronto area, listen up. You can catch Connie in a live discussion this Thursday at 6:30 p.m. and you can find ticket details at samaracentre.ca. Check that out.
Hey, you, come a bit closer. We've got so many more must-see interviews, spicy debates, lifestyle tips, and pop culture moments. So subscribe to our channel by tapping the logo below and don't miss out.